All right, let's get right into it. We're going to break down how poverty is actually measured in India. This is a massive topic for your exams, full of key numbers, big debates, and concepts that you absolutely have to get your head around.
So let's start with the big questions here. How in the world do you put a single number on poverty for a country as huge and diverse as India? And maybe more importantly, why do the experts fight about it so much? Getting the how and the why is really the key to cracking this whole topic.
Okay, here's our game plan. We'll start with the famous Rangarajan line. That's our baseline. Then we'll see how those numbers have been updated. After that, we dive into the huge debate between the IMF and the World Bank. And then we'll look at where things are headed now with this shift to multi-dimensional poverty. I've even got a simple trick to help you memorize all the key indicators. So let's jump in.
First things first, we need an anchor point, a baseline for this whole conversation. And that is the C. Rangarajan Committee report from back in 2014. For a long time, this was the go-to reference for poverty in India.
So what did they say? Well, for rural India, the committee drew the poverty line at a monthly spending of 972 rupees per person. That was the magic number.
Now, a monthly figure can be a bit abstract, so let's break that down. It works out to just 32 rupees a day. And the implication there is pretty stark, right? If you were in a village and you spent more than 32 rupees in a day, then officially, you are not considered poor.
And what about the cities? Well, as you'd expect, things are more expensive. So for urban areas, that monthly line was set higher, at 1,407 rupees per person.
On a daily basis, that's 47 rupees. So you can really see the difference in the cost of living. Now, when they put all this together, the Rangarajan Committee's big conclusion was that 29.5% of India's population was living below the poverty line.
So you're probably wondering, where do these numbers even come from? This brings us to a really key concept for your exams, the Poverty Line Basket, or PLB. Now, it's crucial you don't confuse this with the regular Consumer Price Index, or CPI basket. They're totally different. The PLB is all about subsistence, the bare minimum you need to survive, so it gives a much heavier weight to things like food.
Okay, but those Rangarajan numbers are from 2014. I mean, that's over a decade ago. So what's the picture like now? Well, recently, some economists at the RBI took those old lines and updated them using the very latest consumption data from 2022-23. This gives us a much fresher look.
And one of the most incredible stories to come out of this new data is the transformation in states like Odisha and Bihar. I mean, they saw the most dramatic fall in poverty from 2011 to 2023. We're talking a massive drop of about 40 percentage points. That is just a huge change.
This table really drives home the massive differences across the country. And here's a classic exam-style point, so pay attention to this. Take a look at Chhattisgarh. You'll notice it has the highest rate of rural poverty at 25.1%, and yet it has one of the lowest poverty lines. This is a perfect illustration of how these calculations have to account for different prices in different regions.
But, measuring poverty isn't just a simple math problem. It is intensely debated. And that brings us to what's been called the Great Indian Poverty Debate 2.0. This is a real academic showdown.
So back in 2022, there was this kind of information vacuum because there was no new official data. And into that gap stepped two global heavyweights, the IMF and the World Bank. They both published their own papers trying to estimate poverty in India, and their conclusions could not have been more different.
Just look at these numbers. It's wild. The World Bank came out and said poverty was at 10.2%. Then the IMF paper comes along and says, no, it's actually 0.8%. I mean, they're not even in the same ballpark. So what's going on? It all boils down to methodology. The IMF paper did something really crucial. It factored in the value of government food transfers. And once you account for that, the poverty number just collapses. It's a perfect example of how what you decide to measure can completely change the story.
So you can see why these debates about consumption and poverty lines can get so complicated and, frankly, endless. Because of all this, the official approach in India has started shifting. Let's talk about the future of how we measure poverty, multi-dimensional poverty.
The Multi-Dimensional Poverty Index, or MPI, is just a much more complete way of looking at things. The whole idea is that being poor isn't just about not having money, it's about being deprived in other crucial areas of your life. The MPI captures this by looking at three big dimensions: health, education, and your overall standard of living.
Okay, so for India's MPI, there are 12 specific things they look at across those three dimensions. Now, trying to remember all 12 of those, especially when you're under pressure in an exam, is really tough. So let's learn a simple little trick, a mnemonic, to lock them all in.
I want you to remember this phrase, MBAHESDA, cash. I know it looks a little weird, a bit random, but trust me, every single letter here is a trigger for one of those 12 indicators. Let's break it down and see how it works. Okay, here we go. M is for maternal health. B is for bank account. A is for assets. And you can see how it goes. Now here's a pro tip to make it even easier. Notice the letters that show up twice. A stands for both assets and adolescent mortality. S is for sanitation and schooling. And H is for housing and health, specifically nutrition. If you can link those pairs together in your mind, you'll never forget them. MBAHSD cash. It's a simple tool, but it'll be a lifesaver in the exam.
Whew, okay, we have covered a ton of ground here, from monetary lines to multidimensional indicators. So let's boil it all down into one final comprehensive slide. Think of this as your ultimate revision guide.
This right here is your core summary. Seriously, take a screenshot of this, write it down. You've got the key Rangarajan numbers. You've got the crucial difference between PLB and CPI. You've got the top-line finding from the RBI update about Odisha and Bihar. You've got the heart of the great debate, the World Bank's 10.2% versus the IMF's 0.8%. And you've got all the essentials on the MPI, including our mnemonic. This is everything you need.
And that's our deep dive. We've seen how the way we measure poverty in India has evolved, from a simple basket of goods to this complex set of indicators. But that leaves us with one final big question to think about. As the economy grows, is it enough to define poverty as just mere survival? Or is it time to shift our focus and start measuring it against a standard of a dignified life? Something to chew on.